Now we're back. On the end of the last DVD I had made this box and I was happy with everything except for one thing. And so I decided just to replace the box. Now what I wanted to do is create the dashboard and a piece back here that was going to seal these areas or at least keep your eye from looking in there. And I realized when I made the box that, and because this fit in so nice, that was going to give me a shortcoming. Once you pushed it down, I was not going to have a flat area for the dashboard as I wanted to have for this exact style. Now, so what I did, I recreated the box, which obviously only a few minutes, and another piece of 16th wood. Now this, the only problem that I ran into with this, and so far the only solution is, a reasonable solution is I have to remove the handle every time I want to take it in and out. But for right now, we're not putting any stress on it. And when this box gets into place, it seals off that area. And it recesses the dashboard in almost to a scale location. It's very close to scale, in fact. And so this gives us what amounts to be even more choices by doing this. Now, the only thing I didn't like, see, I didn't like seeing these gaps up here. So what I decided to do is I'm going to put a little rail on here for now. And I made up a little test piece just to see how thick I'd like it. Because now as I raise this up, it hides the view. Now, if you've ever done tile work, you know that you always put the tile in the corner. The one that's furthest away from you, you butt up against the corner, and the one going parallel to your eye line, you butt in, and that gives you a nice tile, what amounts to be a grout line. Well, this will do the same thing, and so instead of seeing a gap in there, this will act like a little piece of molding, and when that little box comes up into place now, it's going to bump up against this, bump up against all of this. It'll be a lot, I think, a lot more rigid and less prone to vibration too, as this kind of a side benefit. So by working on that box and by replacing the original one, I think I made what I think, or I hope, is going to be quite a nice upgrade. And really, in essence, no extra work, virtually no work at all extra. Now this may be even better than I thought it would be, because it'll add a little bit of a scale detail. And remember, we can't really make a totally scale cockpit. That's not going to even be one of our goals, but it is to make it realistic to a point, and something like you would see in a World War II warbird type airplane. And that little edge now, believe it or not, is going to seal that when you see it, and we'll be able to, when we get actually to doing the paint in here, is using several colors of zinc oxide, zinc chromate, to create depth, to create the illusion of depth. Now I want to make sure I have all of these joints double glued from both sides, because if something loosens up in a cockpit, it really is frustrating. And I don't have anything here that I have to worry about as far as making a no take apart plane. Now I'll sand these edges, bring this in, and I have what amounts to be nice rails that'll conceal that joint. As it comes up, it'll be like a tile joint that you don't see. Well, obviously we're going to very judiciously paint this and sand it and fill it and whatever, but I wanted to get all the edges roughed in, and we're at the point in the build where we want to rough all the parts in, not making anything permanent yet. Because just like the box, we may want to change our minds at some point in time, but I think that's going to be an upgrade. And what I'm looking for is every plane I build to just upgrade it over the one before. Now I'm trying to see if there's any other fitting issues I need to work on here. This should all ultimately bottom out. Okay, and that's not going to happen here. It's not happening here. It needs to go down, and I can see that what's happened is I need to take the back piece off I need to take about a 1/64 of an inch off of there to get that to bottom out. But getting this fit now, going back and forth and getting this fit will be the next step on this. So this looks like roughly the amount. I just need to sand that off. Now it seems like a lot of these things that require hand fitting, it's a lot like making anything that's hand fit, like a Ferrari, where every part has to be hand fit in. And I'll go up to the line, see if it fits. If it's still too tight, I'll take the line off. But one of the skills I think is worth pursuing is working with pen or pencil lines. Put the line on, leave it on, take it off, and that gives you about 10 or 15 thousandths of fit. It's a good, useful, no matter what kind of models you're building, it's a good, useful skill, that's for sure. Pattern making and hand fitting of parts. Okay, now before I fit this, you notice I left the line on. Now if this is still not seating right, I'll take the line off as the next step. I just have to be real careful while I don't have the handle in position, and this box is still pretty delicate. But that fits nice now. Now we're exactly where we want to be in terms of fit. Okay. So in this case, it paid to leave the line on. Now when I refit this, now that the back fits in properly, the front is still a little, I call it a hard fit. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Because this piece, before we go into any detailing or adding parts or whatever, this fit, really important to me anyway, that I want it to fit and plug right in there and bottom out on several surfaces. I want it to bottom out on these areas and on these, so it's a plug fit. It's not sitting in there rattling around like, you know, self-destructing or whatever. And boy, I'll bet I could remember at least 10 ships that I either saw or built where the pilot's head came loose or something happened to him. And it's funny, when you glue things and you can't get in at it, that's when things happen. When you can get in this case, we're going to be able to take this out and reach in with a Q-tip if a bug gets in there or you know, something. When it's uncanny how when you make something that you can get at it, it's never a problem. If you sheetrock over a pipe and spackle it all up, guarantees that pipe's going to leak. If you got an access hatch you can get in and work on, like the drain pipes in this house, I have made access hatches everywhere. And then as soon as you have access hatches, nothing ever breaks. As you get down to final fitting, like trying on shoes in a shoe store, sooner or later you find one that fits. And yeah, it looks like we finally have it. Oh, I am so impressed. And that really fits nice now. That's going to be real good. Now the first part, it makes sense that the first part I make is the dashboard, the instrument panel dashboard. There's a little thing I need to consider. I can't really make it totally stock because it's not a totally scale model, but I can get this as similar as I can or as close to this as I can. The other thing is the Spitfires that I've seen both in England and in the United States and in Texas have totally different interiors. And you can see from this picture, this one has a black dashboard and it's painted blue to match. This is one of the blue Spitfires. It's painted blue around the edges. It has a blue seat. Well, the war ones would have no seat. They just had aluminum, brown aluminum or olive drab aluminum or whatever color that zinc oxide is. But you can see some of these, they've been upgraded, modernized, they're more modern instruments and everything. So we really have a free hand to make a dash panel that we're going to be happy with. Now the first thing is, of course, and I've already made the decision, this is going to be the front, so I'll measure off the front half of my little box and get ready to make up the dashboard. Now it's a significant thing that most World War II planes have a straight up and down dashboard that's not angled forward. It's straight up and down, and they always have a little cutout for the aileron pedals, almost all that I've seen anyway. So we're going to try to fabricate something like that to start with out of a piece of 16th balsa. Now here's one of the little resources that I've used over the years. It's a book called Cockpit. You can probably get this in a library or Barnes & Noble, but what it has, it's a very detailed, and of course there's a Spitfire in here, of all of the different cockpits. And since we're not doing any one in particular, and if you look at some of the German planes, they are really sparse. I mean, they really didn't. There's a Stuka canopy. But having this book allows you, a Focke-Wulf 190, give you some idea of what these cockpits look like. There's one for a 0. Now notice the coloring. And there's always something that's red, something that's real important to see in a time of emergency. The aileron pedals, the various dials and gauges. An excellent book, and it's really a book that I've spent a lot of time looking at and trying to come up with ideas, really. Now what's really nice is when you can do placards. We're not able to do that kind of stuff, but if we had one of the machines, and I think some of the people with computer skills can do that, where they shrink down the lettering down to nothing and make decals. There's always something you can pick up, and in my case, I just just enjoy knowing this stuff. Nobody cares. Here's the one for the B-25. Of course, we had painted on cockpit windows, but look how simple a B-25 cockpit is. It's not a whole lot different, and down here it tells you what all the instruments are, their function. So here's my feeling is, if you're really trying to do a nice cockpit or something that's semi-scale, I think step one should be, here's a P-47. Here, Gerald Champ, there's what you got to do if you want to impress us. There you go. But anyway, you see how some of the planes are very complex. There's a lot of switches. A lot of switches. There's 6-8 switches, 15 different instruments. Some of them are relatively simple, and usually the German ones are usually pretty simple. Air Cobra, P-38. This is what's really nice about, and I think it's really nice about, having some of these, the books like this. Here's a Typhoon. So what it does, and notice the yoke, the British planes all have the spade handle. That the thing that makes modeling fun is knowing that you can do some of this stuff. And here it's telling you what every instrument, where it is and what it does, and a Mosquito, Beaufighter. We did that thing on a Beaufighter not long ago. And it's just, the more of this you can see, again, on what I really like is when they'll give you the instruments if you really want to go that extra level, like you're building a scale plane. But we're not. And so we're pretty free. Here's a Spitfire. Now that's what a war Spitfire looks like. And we'll be able to replicate that pretty simply. It won't be real difficult. Almost everything on here is something we'll be able to get pretty close to. And notice, in this one, it's not painted blue. It's zinc chromate. So before you can really go ahead and do much, or really, in fact, do anything, you really have to know what the real item looks like before you can make a model of it, no matter what it is. Knowing what the real thing looks like is always a big step toward getting something that's pretty accurate. And this book really helps. This is a great book. Now, just another thing, if you notice, this book is pretty well dog-eared and beat up, and it's not a brand new pretty book. Like my tools, in fact, this part's starting to get deteriorated. I'm going to have to get some tape on that. And there's a reason, because this book's been all over the world. This book has been in England, this book's been in California, probably several other places, Texas, whatever, that people have enjoyed reading it, enjoyed learning from it, and I'd certainly, if anybody else is really dead serious about this, I'd gladly loan them the book. Just let me know that you're really striving to learn about this stuff. And I'm sure a book like this is $30, $40. I'm glad to loan it to somebody because there's so few of us that still share the passion for this. And when you find them, in reality, we have to share the passion. That's all there is to it. So just to make a pattern, and we got a piece of scrap here, make sure I'm using the front. I know I'll have to account for the thickness of the 16th on each side. But this is basically the shape I have to work with. And I can use this for a pattern to try to lay out how I want to do this. And before I make the pattern, I have to account for that 1/16 of an inch. That's the side. And this in essence should slide right in place when I'm done with it, if I've got it accurate. And in this case I'll leave the line on until I get a nice fit that it slides right down. Now by leaving the line on, this makes this relatively easy to get a good fit. I know I'm hard on that side. If I just take the line off, again with little parts like this, making precision fits is, well, on a whole plane it's nice if you can do that. And it's so tight you can't even drop it out if you want to. So this gives us, now while I have it in here, I may as well dress off the top to be an exact fit too. Now I've got an exact pattern of what is going to fit inside of here. Now I need to cut this out, and I can't make it prototypical because on a real Spitfire this would be longer. So I need to kind of fudge this, and I need to cut in what amounts to be, make this into a T so I have a place to put the aileron pedals. And of course everything on here is a little bit of a trying to make it realistic, but again, we can't get the aspect ratio right, but we definitely need a place to put aileron pedals. Here's something we visit every year, Cockpit stuff, return to Windy. And you know, every once in a while, we do get it back expediently. We don't always get it back. And because a lot of this stuff is stuff you only get to use once, and you can see we've got these we don't use anymore. We have another way of doing it, I think a better way. Some of the clear plastic, and this is just something that came on a candy dish or something. You need some of this clear plastic to do the method that I use. And you need, of course, and here's a real tip-off. Buy some of these in a store and then go make Xerox copies, bigger and smaller. In this case, smaller, bigger. Here's a picture of the Spitfire dashboard. Several of the things that, some of the bigger instruments, because all the instruments on the dashboard are not the same size. So what's happened over the years, a lot of people have contributed things, a lot of people have borrowed things, but we have a nice supply of stuff now, and now we need to just do the layout. And again, if you can see the aileron pedals here, and this is not a Spitfire, of course, I can tell because it doesn't have a spade, but you need to have a way of getting your feet under there. I don't know why I'm so worried about that. Switches are always a dominant part. They're always toggle switches. And at least, you know, minimum amount of instruments. So from this point I can just lay this out, and some kind of quadrants that control throttle. Here's a trim wheel. And we're going to try to incorporate as much of this stuff as we can. And somewhere, if we have a place on this video, I'm going to try to include some of the footage from other, I think the Typhoon is about the best, that little ways that we made some of these little accoutrements. Now, the best way I know of to cut reasonably nice holes is with a grindstone and a Dremel tool. The grindstone makes, as long as you go slow, it makes the best, I think, the best holes. looking at the picture, but I'm not trying to make this exactly scale either. And after a while, it definitely gets pretty delicate. There's no doubt about it. You gotta really watch it. So we wind up with this. It's a 16th piece of balsa. It just has random instrument placings. To make it realistic, I try to keep them different diameters because I have all those different sizes of instruments, of course. Now, the only problem is this is really delicate right now. And if I were to paint this, it really doesn't look that realistic. But I found a better way to get what amounts to be a finish on it is just glue it to a piece of wet and dry sandpaper. And then we can go back in and reburn the holes. Now I burn them from one side with the grinder and then burn them from the other side. Go very carefully. We use a tapered grindstone so you can do all sides. I'm just waiting for this to dry. This is thick, put on with thick CA. Once it dries, I'll get a brand new blade, trim this out, and then just reburn the holes. I don't want to dry it with kicker. I want it to dry on its own. And the grindstone is obviously the easiest way to just go right through the back and then come back through the front and even it all out. Now I like to, obviously you could burn these right out, but I think it's easier, if I remember right, just to cut through the sandpaper, and that gives you a little bit of an alignment. And then the final thing, just burn it out with the grindstone. And it's not like there's only one way to do any of this stuff, but I think the sandpaper, the wet and dry sandpaper, gives a nice texture, realistic. Because what we're looking to do inside the cockpit area is have a lot of texture. A lot of different complementing textures. I don't want it all to be flat black dope. I don't want it all to be zinc chromate. The more shades I can get in there, the better it's going to be. And even when this is roughed out, as this is, whoop, it still has a nice texture. The texture looks realistic when this is, when it sparkles in the sun. You can see the little spark. Now, a lot of times it's best to go both ways rather than trying to burn your way through one way or the other. And there's always a little bit of a grinding flash on here you can get right off. Now the next thing I need to do is transpose all these roughly. Don't need to do it exactly, just roughly. All these locations onto a piece of This is just white office paper. And then I need to lay out the instruments. Now, I like to lay these out using Elmer's glue because Elmer's glue dries perfectly clear. Now, I don't trim anything off until I'm absolutely done. And here's the trick right now. The trick right now is this is up. Now I can go through my piles of instruments. If I want to go crazy, I can go look at the Spitfire dashboard instrument panel and try to match the instruments. Don't really, I'm not that fanatical about it, but we have plenty of choices. In fact, some of these, when you make them, it's a good idea to just make them a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. I mean, it probably costs you a nickel a copy or a dime or something. And then you have some real nice replications here, and I can pick out the appropriate ones that I want to use. And actually, you can preview the ones you want to use. We're using World War II aircraft, and obviously they have cars, boats, World War I, World War II. I can get a look at how these would look in this scale. And when I find the ones I want, I can just cut them out and then Elmer's glue and make the whole instrument panel on that piece of office paper. And you can just put a drop of Elmer's glue where an instrument's going to go. Spread it out with a Q-tip. You don't really need much. It's aliphatic resin. Wipe around the extra with the edge. Try to drop the instrument in as close to where you want to have it as possible. But since it dries clear, it really doesn't even matter. And we'll just go right through this, picking out the right size instruments and just dropping them in place with Elmer's glue. Now the advantage of using Elmer's glue, the advantage if any oozes out or comes out somewhere where you don't want it, it dries clear and in the morning it disappears. Now anytime I add one, what I try to do is just line it up and see if I've got the look that I'm looking for. And with this case, I don't want to have any of the little gauges or dials upside down or something. So we got all our instruments now, and I have that piece of clear sheet plastic. Now we could mount these, we could mount this just like that, but it wouldn't simulate the glass, and the glass is one of the things that makes this look very realistic. At some point in the development, it's the glass reflection. So another thing, if I were to cut this out ahead of time and then try to line these up, it's more difficult than if I glue this on first and then trim it. But look at the difference that it looks if I take some of this and now laminate it. And I got to hold it in position. And it's the glare, especially when you're out in the sun and you see the light reflecting off of the plastic. And now if we were trying to put these little round pieces of plastic in there, you'd lose the three-dimensional look. So we get the best of both worlds by just using a sheet of plastic. Now I found it's best to keep the glue away from, see, I just want to glue it, I don't want to get any up that squeezes out into the instruments. This is not a structural part, so we can be a little judicious about it. We don't really need, we're not building a bridge here or anything. And I'll just let that dry out, obviously with no kicker. Now, just want to make sure I haven't got any glue dripping out into the instrument panel, into where I'm going to see it in the instruments. Now the choices I have here, if I were going to work on this more tonight, I could CA this, but it's just as easy right now. I can put some aliphatic, some Elmer's glue on here and just let it dry overnight. Then once it dries overnight, I'll trim it off. It's not a big deal. Either way is fine, but it's always easier to laminate a part and then trim it, not try to make 3 parts the same and glue them together. It's always easier to do the trimming as the last step. I think that little dashboard's looking pretty good. Karen just advised me of a little change of plan, and I'll get into that in a minute, but what I decided to do is just do it with the thicker CA, because I wanted to work on this for a few minutes more, and that'll just allow me to trim it all off. But we have another issue in the shop right now that we have to deal with. Now, if you remember, if you go back to the old 1987 videos when I first started, you'll notice and you'll remember Buster as being part of them. Buster, of course, has passed away and buried on our property. And Stacy and Rob had this cat, Murphy. He had to be put to sleep. He unfortunately developed cancer early in his life, and at several operations had to be put to sleep. And the kids got another little cat, a little kitten that I got on a video not long ago. And unfortunately, they were allergic to the dander in the cat. And they had to take him back to the shelter and get another cat. And today the shelter called and said they have another cat for them. So we're going to go down and look at their new cat tonight. Well, you wouldn't think having a cat is a big deal, but I know having a pet in my shop was a big deal to me. And this new cat, his name is Punky. Of all things, his name is Punky. And he's got his shots and everything. And so tonight we're going to go down to the shelter and pick him up. Punky. I'm going to give that another minute or so to dry, trim it off with a brand new blade, and probably that's all I'm going to get done except to get ready to pick up Punky. I can't believe this cat. Anyway, I really, Karen can never have cats because she's allergic to them. And we found out something interesting, that if you're allergic to cats, as Karen is, a black cat is the worst. A black cat has 6 times more dander, or can have, than a light colored cat. Now I don't know what color this cat is because we only saw his picture on the internet, but I know the kids, we all miss Chicky and we all miss Murphy, and when you get a new pet, it's always an exciting day. Now there is one thing that is an issue with anytime you use sandpaper for an instrument panel. One of the things you have to be careful of, if you scratch this or get some paint or something on it, you're probably not going to be able to get it off in a satisfactory way. So, or even if you scratch it with sandpaper. But what I do is I break the edge very carefully, again using my SIG landing gear sanding block, which by the way works great. And now I need to see if I've, yeah, it looks pretty good, if I've got this that it drops right in, and if it doesn't, of course we need to just make a slight adjustment. And I want this to fit, of course, almost a press fit. I'm going to have to take a few thousandths off each side, but I don't want to scratch it. Again, another one of those situations where you want to have a tight fit, but not put stress on anything. It's going to take a little more to get it cleaned up and get it to fit right in there. Now that's the fit I'm looking for, that it just fits in there without glue, because we're going to be taking it in and out many times before we're done here. But before I go to the next step, the next thing I have to do is get rid of these 2 pieces, and I need to trace that out. And I'm going to cut that out with a brand new blade so that that's not in the way, and when we put the floor in, the aileron pedals can go in there. Okay, we're back from the shelter with the new cat. Punky, back from the shelter. Hey, are you in there? Uh-oh, I hear him, Rob.
Yeah, does he make a noise?
Whoop. He's checking out his new environment.
He's checking out the litter box.
Checking out the litter box. Now there's the right move.
Let me see, hold on.
He can't get used to his new house.
Confining him to the bedroom.
His new house.
That's what you do with Buddy?
Punky.
Punky.
It's all taken care of. We start the Petco, and the woman at the shelter gave. He's in the camera.
Let me see your face. You're eating the camera. You like cameras?
When he's got his big.
Come here. You want to be on? You want to be on Punky View? Punky the cat.
Be careful. Be careful coming home.
Punky the new cat. Come on, Punky. Come on. You want to see the camera?
Back to Rob, okay?
He loves the camera. I can see that.
Sweetie.
That's nice. Oh, you did. Good, okay. Oh, good.
Hey. Hey, you know who John Brodak is?
Go on.
You know who Buzz Brodak is? You know who Wendy is? You know who John Cafaro is? You know who Elliot Scott is? It's not funny, Punky. Punky the cat.
Who is that?
So he likes his toy. Hey. Hey, you better not be a bird eater either. I don't want you to be like Art's cat eating birds. There's no eating birds.
Plenty of things to check out here.
No eating birds.
Just in the bed. Why you spend like an hour and a half under the bed?
Oh.
You won't have to worry if you have any mice in the house. It'll be the end of the mice.
You're done.
You could save all that money on peanut butter and mouse traps.
Yeah, that's what we use.
You feel an allergy at all?
I'm good.
Just remember, we eat cat food, we don't eat birds. One bird and you're back at the shelter. Day one of the big Punkadooley face-off here, the McKeever household. The next part of our adventure, we have our neighbor who drew us a sketch at a porch in an attempt, as she remembers it as a girl, but the building inspector in town requires us to have a photograph of the house when it had a porch. And Karen, what did they do today? She called the museum, and the museum has a photo of our house when it had a porch, and she's so happy. We have company, Jay and Will over here. We're running out to get a picture of the porch. Is that unbelievable? A moment in stunt history. They have a picture of our house, which is 100 years old when it had a porch. And we're going to go to the museum and get a copy. So here we are right in our own town. I never even knew that this existed. This is the Meadowlands Museum. And we're going to go see if we have a picture of our house with the porch on it, which will pretty much grandfather us in and allow us to bypass the variance, save about $2,000 that way. Look at this sign. You believe this? Pretty cool. I'm excited. We're excited. This makes Karen's day complete. And don't tell her I really wish I was home working on my canopy detail, but this really is an old house. Wow, look at this stuff. The history of Rutherford, New Jersey.
You see our front room, the glass exhibit?
No, we
Have
didn't.
you been in
We've
Rutherford?
never been here. We've been living in Rutherford for 15 years.
Yeah.
15 years and you've never been here.
Now, what year was this
Oh my
taken?
goodness.
I
Well,
don't know.
Probably in the 30s, Jack.
In the 30s. You think this was taken in the 30s?
okay. Just a minute.
Now look, Dale is going to be flipping out. We had one of the women in our neighborhood that was a child at this time draw us a sketch.
Yeah.
This is exactly
exactly what she drew.
what she drew.
That was
This is
very
from
good.
the
Wow.
archives of the township.
Oh, I
Yeah,
will
that's
tell
right.
that
This is like an official.
Yeah,
my
see,
goodness.
You can't keep
Oh,
that.
blood, that's it.
it's the
Wow.
block and the
Now, how many pictures do you have? Is this the only one?
Yeah.
That's all we need is
Well,
one.
of your picture, of your.
No, I mean of my house. This is the only picture that exists so far.
That we know.
Well, we know the owner in Florida who's coming back in March, but that's too late.
Yeah, but you have that one.
This
You
is
don't
great.
have-
This
yeah,
does
you
the
got
trick
it.
for us.
You made my
Wow.
wife so happy.
I know.
Thank you so much, and we will definitely send you.
Every
Now, this is every street, and how do you know what year this is?
No,
now?
we don't know
You don't
the
know what year.
no, you can pick any of these out. Say this is Ames Avenue.
Right, I see. Oh,
So,
my
like,
God.
here, like,
Well, you
here-
can tell by the cars. There's no modern cars in
but
there.
here's 8 Ames
Okay.
Avenue and tells you the plot
my
and the
God.
block.
Do you think the building inspector is going to be impressed that we do this research?
I think it proves your point, and that's all
I
it
went to the library on
counts.
Saturday, and I spoke with 2 of the librarians.
You don't know
who
what
gave
we've
my
been
name
going
to
through
Rod
here.
Leaf.
Yeah,
And they called
Wow.
me back and told me, Rod said call the Meadowlands Museum.
yeah.
But it was, when I found out. it was-
Elliott
the museum
Manor.
was
Look
already
at this.
closed.
Look at
So,
Elliott Manor
everybody
up
was a
there.
holiday.
Wow.
Well, we were here.
Oh, I didn't know that.
We're here every Monday.
Oh, my goodness. I
Only
didn't know.
Chris.
So we come from the Meadowlands Museum where we got a picture of one picture. There's only one picture in the whole world of our house that still had the porch. And this is the reason we came back here. And Karen made friends with the woman because we want to copy their design where they did a little octagon out on the end of the porch. And we, ironically enough, the same contractor that we're going to hire did this porch. And so Lee Costa. And so Karen kind of befriended the woman a little bit. And look at some of the other little things, because we're going to have to re-landscape, of course. But I love the old-fashioned fan, and I love this turret. So here we are. What a day. You couldn't have planned a day like today. Anyway, it really worked out great. And the woman who makes it all happen, the lovely Karen. I need to go work on my cockpit. You guys are stopping production on my cockpit. Come on. Here's some updated pictures on Gerald Champ's P-47 cowl and some of the take-apart features. Look at the nice vents on that blower cowl, Jer. And I assume that hole is the, well, from the email it seems that's the exhaust outlet. That looks pretty cool. I'm assuming looking at this there'll be no problem with clearance. I hope you have a giant air outlet opening on this somewhere. Those 4-strokes do run hot. And I'm sure putting one of these P-47s together is a labor of love, as any semi-scale is. What am I talking about? Notice Gerald thinks he's putting a fast one over on me, laying it out on his granite countertop. Very cute. And I know that is a labor of love, boy. There's no doubt about it. Any of these semi-scale projects. Just a lot of work. And I hope you're swinging that big 4-bladed prop on that big mean cowl opening there, baby. And here are some of the, obviously, the bulkhead take-apart features to get the wing in and out. Gerald, I gotta congratulate you. That looks like it's coming out great. We're looking forward to seeing more pictures, but keep in mind that labor of love that any semi-scale. I don't care what your passion is. When you go that extra mile, it's always a mile of extra work. Oh, here we go, the Walbridge kid, look. The Walbridge child, twins, learning how to use the video camera. How appropriate. Megan and Hannah Walbridge, that is so cute. Karen is jealous. Now that would be a great name to put on the on your Spitfire. Great nose art, the twins. And here's the proud Papa. Oh man, Karen and I are jealous. We have to be honest, we're jealous. Still waiting for our grandchildren. Anyway, thanks to Rich for sharing, and Gerald, everybody that's been sharing this. It really makes our day go a lot smoother, especially with the chaos we have. Porches, real estate sales, Spitfire cockpits. We're in the middle of a very volatile period. Yeah, we really do love getting all this email stuff every day. Thanks to everybody.
Well, we woke up this morning to a winter wonderland. Now, Dave was supposed to come down this weekend. Dave and Woody had planned to come down. They have 8 inches of snow. We're in the middle of getting 6 inches of snow, and a plow just went through. But we're going to be snowed in. It'll be at least 1 or 2 days, but it'll give us some time to work on. Finishing up the cockpit detail. I wish I could find my newspaper here. There's the neighbor's paper right there. We got to find our paper. Oh, it'll be fun digging out later, baby. Right now, though, it's time for Feed the Birds and Javalia Coffee. The wonderful winterland of Rutherford, New Jersey. Good day to work on a cockpit detail. So it's hard to understand why the birds love Wendy and Karen early in the morning. Wendy, you're such a nice guy. You could be downstairs working on your Spitfire, but you come and feed us in the morning. And then when we eat the whole feeder out, oh, to feed one feeder, I got to take the snow off. And then as soon as we finish it, you go get us more. No wonder everybody loves Wendy. Well, almost everybody. It's a snowy day in Rutherford, and there's just nothing better than having a breakfast with the snowflakes falling and the birds eating Wendy's seeds. And lovely Karen is cutting up some bread for them. I'm going to clean this other feeder for them too. And then we're going to go down and work today. Maybe get a couple hours of work before we go get the snowblower out. Okay, the next step on our little make a cockpit adventure. I have these little jewels that I bought at Michael's. And they're really crystals, hot fix crystals. Well, I'm not sure what they are. They're available in all sizes. We're going to try to make the lights that would normally be on the dashboard out of them. I got together a bunch of little pins and things to make other little parts. But basically what I want to do in this session, before it's time to go blow the snowblower, I want to put the rest of the detail on the instrument panel. Now what I try to do at the beginning of every day, I try to get a look at, well, at my old book here, the cockpit book, get some idea, just even the slightest idea of what some of the things I'd want to replicate are. Now, one of the first things that I want to replicate are the switches, and I looked out on here. Usually the switches are in a straight line or in a vertical line. They don't just randomly put a switch here and there. They put a row of switches. So that's what I'm going to try to do as the first step, is make up some switches. This is, again, this is relatively easy. In fact, it's very easy, and it adds a nice little detail. And we've done this many times before. It always has a nice impact on the program. Now I always keep a little collection of things like this. Little things, and these are the little tiniest washers that I have. And some of the pins, and I'll take the smaller of the T-pins. You could make these all different sizes, but needless to say, we'll start with a couple of different, well, what I always do is if I think I need 4 or 5, I make 10. I always make a few extras. So let me see how many T-pins I have, and we can... This goes relatively quickly. It's relatively easy to do this. Not a big deal either. And this little way that I use, it just seems to work. And of course, you can make bigger switches out of the thicker T-pins, smaller out of the smaller pins, or real tiny ones out of straight pins, since we don't need the head. The first thing is to get a collection of pins. And the pins, keep in mind, are made out of a relatively soft steel. They're not made, that's not music wire. So the first step on our little operation is whichever size T-pin you decide to use is just trim off the head. What we want to wind up with is the pointy side of the pin and a flat. You can leave them as long as possible for now. It's the easiest way to do it. Trim some of these off. I think I got a dozen or so pins here. I'll make a dozen of these switches up. It takes almost no time at all just to make a few extras. The reason I like to make a few extras is not every one comes out exactly the way I like. And what I can do then is get ones that match, and you'll see why in about a few minutes. Some of them come out just looking a little bit different than others. In some cases you may want to take one switch and paint it red or yellow to identify that it's a performing some function other than the traditional ones that are on the instrument panel of a real plane. And again, these little switches, there's probably 100 different ways to do this. But this way, I think, is simple, straightforward, light, cheap, serves a lot of purposes. So once I get the pins ready, then I've got to create the flat that's on the pin. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You can do that with vice grip pliers if you have a set that doesn't have any knurls. And I'm not sure I still have that set. I had a set that had no knurls. Special set I bought, but I'm not sure I have it. But if not, you can just use a vise. You can use an anvil, anything that you can use to get a nice flat on it. So, but this step, this gets us in a ballpark. I think we have 12 there. And what they are, they're just pins, T-pins, soft steel plated with the head cut off. Now, since I can't find the pliers, the easiest way to do this is holding the pointy end in your fingers, and in this case it's just a vise. Could be anything that's relatively flat. A small hammer. Now, typically the switches used in World War II airplanes had a spade end. It looked like a spade end. And I'm just pounding this down. No set shape. Not every one comes out exactly the way you want it. Sometimes you miss. But this is just what it looks like. It's got a spade end on it now. A flattened end. Now normally the toggle switch would be up, down, and I'll make up a dozen of these. Not all will come out perfect, but since they're almost no money to make them, we just can make as many as we want. The next thing we need is just a piece of scrap wood, any kind of scrap wood. Soft balsa would be best. This is a sheet of Teflon that I got from Dave Midgley. If you didn't have Teflon, you could use wax paper, that's for sure. Now it's important to figure out how we want to make these switches. In neutral, or up or down. So if I decide I want to put the switch down, for instance, and of course down could just be reversed to up. I have it on an angle, of course, and I think that looks pretty much like what a little, well, one of these little guys would look like. And I can put it in and out an amount that I think is scale. I can make some of these click click and some in neutral, and I can just go right down the list now and make each one just a little bit different. These are little 080 washers. Just lay one or two out at a time. And the idea is if I can get them to look, whoop, I learned a long time ago, use pliers, don't push them in by hand, they still have sharp edges. But like I said, make sure you have plenty of washers around, they jump all around. Amazing when you're trying to do something on camera how it works. There we go. Now if you were to leave it out, it would be a long toggle switch, and there are some like that. If you look at Especially the German planes have these long-handled things. But the British ones all seem to have little switches very similar to that. Now, if I wanted to radius these off or round them a little with a Dremel tool, that wouldn't be a bad idea either. And I try to get them sticking out about the same amount, but of course I could make long ones or short ones. Okay, now we got these laid out. And what I'm going to do is take a parting wheel and just run it across each switch to get rid of all the hammer marks. You can see there's little tiny hammer marks in it, and then radius this edge out to try to get them all pretty equal. It's funny now, in the middle of doing these switches, the biggest 3 boxes I've ever seen in my life came. It's Karen's dishes. She ordered some collectible dishes from a person in Tennessee. The snowiest day of the year they get here, what a mess. Now the idea here is just to clean this off. And any that are not really close to being the shape we want, I can shape them just a little bit. Make them radius. Karen and her dishes. Now the next step is to mix up some 5-minute epoxy with some black dye. And the epoxy is going to hold the pin to the backdrop washer. What I may have to do is thin it just a little bit, and that's why we put the Teflon or the wax paper underneath it. And what I try to do is get each one of these to just have, and I'll try to get an old, well, let's see, a Q-tip or a brush or something. I forget how I did this. I'm going to have to play that video again. And just get, or even a toothpick, and just get them, just 1 drop of that epoxy on each one. Hit it with a little hair dryer. I don't want it going out and making a big puddle beyond the washer. I just want just enough. 1 drop will probably do it on each one. Now you can buy black resin dye from Aerospace Composite or CST. One little $2 tube will last you, or jar will last you a lifetime. But it's always nice to have it in it, and it's handy to have the epoxy dye too when you want to make an epoxy joint, like inside a cockpit when you glue the cockpit on, that you don't really have to see globs of epoxy. It kind of, well, this is the dye. Kind of deceives your eye a little bit. We're going to mix this up, of course. You need very little, and use the smallest amount you can. The less the better. This may be even a little bit too much here. I haven't mixed this in so long. You just need enough, just a drop will in essence make it that it's black. Now I'll take a fresh Q-tip here. Now I try to take each one and just take a glob and after you do a few, you know just how much to put on there, and it's not a lot. In fact, I probably got too much on that first one. That is the kind of stuff, if you were a scale modeler and just doing scale models, you'd probably notice from day one. But to do a nice cockpit on a semi-scale plane, like Gerald Champ's P-47, I hope he's going to raise the bar and get excited about it, and some of the other people that are making these semi-scale models. And if Rich Oliver finishes up the Focke-Wulf, I hope he's not going to paint on the canopy or anything. That's fine for a Testarossa type plane, or I think these models deserve the extra time. Now, to get the the epoxy down in there. And this does, sometimes it gets a little tricky. But the little switches, because they're a different texture, we're going up into sandpaper where it's a little less black and it's a darker, well, this is a shiny color as opposed to a dull color. These really stand out in the final product. And I was surprised when I did them on other ships just how effective it was. And I hope these are going to be some of the details that show up well in the Control Line World article, which John Pothier and I are working on and shooting still photos and trying to get that to be a world-class article. And I'm sure John will make me sound good when we're done. Now, what happens here is, and it doesn't matter if you do this one time or twice or three, or you can do this, and if you see there's too much epoxy building up, it's real easy. Just take some of it off with a, in fact, I see some of this is just getting a little bit too much. And I know not every switch is going to come out that I'll be happy with it, but it won't really matter, because I'll just make more than I need. Yeah, we got that around there. Now, in this last minute or so of babysitting, I can make sure I've got the epoxy nice and even, that you can't see that it's a washer. And then these have to dry a couple hours, or an hour or so. Because what I don't want to do is put my fingerprints into the soft epoxy. Even though it dries, it'll take your fingerprint when you go to press it in. So we'll just put these aside, and at the end of the session or tomorrow come back. Or after we deal with these 3 big boxes upstairs. And Karen bought some dishes from a woman in Tennessee, and we could not, they matched some of the dishes she has, and there was no other way to get them. And these were like, I don't know if they're collector dishes or what the hell they are, but when we spoke to this woman, she said, I will pack them guaranteed, not one will break. And I think she did. I think she paid somebody to do it, which is always a good choice if you're packing dishes. But Karen loves her dishes, there's no doubt about it. Okay, now, just before the black epoxy kicks off, I mix up some clear, and I dab just a tiny amount, just on the end of each switch. And what that does, that just tends to make it look a little shinier than the background, which gives it a little more texture too. But again, I got to put these aside to dry. This is not something that's going to dry in 5 minutes, because as I use them, what happens is as I install them, I'm going to put my fingerprints in them if I rush this. So I know from experience, better to just put these away and move on to the next step. One of the things I always like to try to simulate is the priming knob. There's usually a priming knob on most World War II planes that I know of, where you press it in and it primes the engine. Now this looks to be what the primer on a Spitfire looks like, but we're going to make it a little bit different. We're not trying to make this scale, but it has the same thing. It's a little, it looks like a jet fueler type of thing, and it primes the engine when you start it. Now what I always try to do when I'm doing other projects, I always try to save the little scraps of tubing. This is all different little sizes. I want to find a straight piece if I can. Yeah, this will be fine for right now, because making a telescoping piece of tubing that's going to look something like a primer, I can figure out how long I want to make it, cut the tube with a razor. All you really have to do is score it. Now I want to find a piece of tubing that this will telescope into. And what's nice about all the K&S tubing, they will telescope. Maybe I need to go back to the box. There we go. Now I want this piece to be half of this distance. Now I have two telescoping pieces. Let me get one inside the other. I want to dress off the edges with just a little piece of sandpaper, so this is going to look a little more realistic. And just one drop of thick CA on there. When it's all done, I could put a coat of clear epoxy on that knob if I want to make it shiny, or just hit it with 600 sandpaper if I want to make it dull, depending on what I'm looking for the view, the look of it. Now that wouldn't even look bad in, you know, in a Cardinal, a Strega. Now a good trick when you're gluing this in, it's a good little trick. What I do, I put some thick CA on a pin and run it from the back. That kind of gets it all off and it makes a big blob on the end. Then I go turn it around, push it in from this side, and just try to let it dry without kicker. Now so far, that primer looks pretty realistic. Of course we're not making a scale model. I don't know how many times I have to convince myself of that, but that is the truth. Now I want to pick appropriate spots to put those little jewels that came from Michaels. And they simulate the landing lights. There's always a light when the gear are up or down, a light that the landing lights are on. There's almost no planes I know that don't have some lights on the dashboard, indicator lights. Now an example is here are the indicator lights. One is usually red, one is usually green for retractable gear. Some of the indicator lights on some of the other airplanes, and I just look for a generic what does that look like kind of thing. And on some of the planes there's, well, I guess emergency overheating lights, different things like that, but we want to space them accordingly. Alright, and here are some of the red and green indicator lights. So we've got a good idea now, something that would make this look, well, like it would be a realistic World War II dashboard. Now these make a great replication of those gear up, gear down lights. I'll get the address, but any of the craft stores have them. And one of the things they're supposed to have is this heat activated glue on the back where you just hit it with a hairdryer, and that's not going to work for us. We're going to try to use real glue on this. But the little pouch that comes out, you get pretty much, you're looking at a lifetime supply since we're only going to use a few of these, but you need to handle them, and I like to handle them with forceps if possible. Let me get the phone. Now, there's a couple of different tricks I've tried on this. None of them have been perfect. What I'm trying to do is I take, and I'll show this of course in real time, I don't like to use the heat activated glue. The way they tell you to do it is it's for material. But what I can do here is I want to hold this in my little forceps. You really can't do this with if your hands are too big, or an old pair of tweezers. Take a toothpick and put one drop of thick CA on the back of it and then drop it in position. And you think it would be a little easier than it is until you go to do it, but it really, that jewel, when the sun is shining or when you have dedicated light, that really does look like what these little lights that show gear up and overheating and things on a real aircraft look like. Kind of a neat little way to do it. Now the way I try to do this, I put some thick CA out there, and of course that's slow drying. Try to get, let me get a clean toothpick, one that's got CA on it already. And by taking this and grabbing it with the tweezers flat, it's given me the most choices for positioning it, but most of the time it jumps out off the tweezers. I take one drop of this, and the tiny amount is all you need to hold this on. You only get to drop this in place once, that's the problem. Glue out of here. As I just dropped it, no, it's okay. I need to line this up. Now it usually sticks to the pliers, and then you have to just put this. And that's how I've put, well, and no kicker, needless to say. Just relax, let that dry. But that gives you a nice, I think, a pretty realistic rendition of what the lights would look like. And of course, depending on what you're trying to replicate, if you were making a Testarossa, you could put 25 of them on there. It wouldn't matter. And I know when the sun hits these, and when the sun hits that glass, that plastic, boy, that always, a lot of people, their jaw drops when they see the sun. They're launching a plane and they say, whoa, look at that. So now from every angle I try to look at it, and it certainly looks like what I had in mind. I can't install the switches yet, they're still kind of tacky and wet, but I can make up some of the other little parts that I want to have on here. Now after I get the switches all lined up in exactly the way I want them, you remember all these pins are on an angle up. So what I want to do is seal each one thick CA, not thin CA. Thin CA might work its way down and screw up the, well, I don't want to take a chance that what it'll do, it'll go right in and come out on the sandpaper in a big glob. And once this dries, then I can trim these off. And for the amount that this is going to, the stress that's on here, which is almost nothing, and when that's done I can trim it off. But little by little, the dashboard's shaping up. Dashboard instrument panel, not sure what the right nomenclature is. And I've seen a lot of them that haven't, even some of mine, when I was done, they, right up to the end, they didn't look real convincing, and when I installed them, they said, wow, it looked great. But we got a list of about, well, a bunch of other little things we want to make while this is glue, it's drying, and again, I don't want to use any kicker anywhere near this. It's the glass and it's the texture that this is dull, the switches are shiny. And actually, if we wanted to, at the very end, we could put one little drop of clear epoxy on there and just let it dry, just to make it a little shinier. I'm not going to make it this complicated, but I'd like to make something like what the mixture control would be, something that would simulate this. I want to just take a piece of scrap plywood, and plywood basically because I want to do some carving on it. I want to see if this is going to fit in here. Oh, just about right. I just touched one drop of thick CA on there, and I put some kicker because I want to get going with this. And now I want to take the Dremel tool parting wheel and carve some, maybe 1 or 2 notches in there. Now I use this one for a practice one, but what happened is this got too thin at the edge, so I just cut off another piece of plywood. Realized this would be an easier way to do it. Made this little piece up, and it's just basically a piece of plywood. Cut the slots, and now I'm dressing them off. Cut the slots with a parting wheel, and I can dress them off this way, really, until they look like a realistic thickness against the picture. A little quadrant. I could blacken this up with a Sharpie marker. That gives us a pretty realistic quadrant. Now we just got to fashion up the handles. Each time I add a piece, it adds a little bit of a three-dimensional appearance to that. I just need to make the controls that are going to go in there. I want to look at the book and see what shape handles they typically used for that.
Now it's really starting to come together here little by little. And I just try to get a look at how that's going to look when it's all put together. Well, one of the things I would like to replicate is the compass that sits 90 degrees to the dashboard or to the instrument panel. I would like to replicate that. I need to make a little piece coming out here and then find that exact instrument in my instrument case. You know what I can do with each one of these, I look down here, 15, and I can tell what this is, the magnetic compass. So it really is nice, and you and I both know there's not many people are going to appreciate this level of detail, but I know Joe Adamusco will, and I know several other people. I know Dave Downey will, and Ludwig, and John Cafaro, and you just go right down the list, and maybe even Rich Walbridge will appreciate this little extra attention to detail. And here's the correct magnetic compass instrument, so we're going to cut that out, and then I'm going to make a little piece of balsa wood that I can attach with a 90-degree piece. Now I want to burn the correct size hole through a piece of 64th plywood. Again, going from both sides until I have the diameter hole I want, because I know you're not going to be able to cut a hole this accurate with a knife. And we know that's the correct magnetic compass instrument, get the right diameter. Now what I want to do is get a piece of plastic and a piece of maybe 1/8 inch balsa to simulate that holder that's going to hold that in place at 90 degrees to the instrument panel. Again, I'm glad we had the correct, it looks like this will be just about right too. Now I don't want to get too much glue on here for obvious reasons. And when that dries, I'll burn that hole through with the Dremel tool also. Now once I get this glued up, I want to have that edge to be black. Sharpie marker works good, a permanent marker. And once I get that in there, now I need to get the little piece of glass and the little instrument and get that put in. And then hope this doesn't break when I go to cut it apart, because it's going to be real thin when I'm done. I'm going to wait till that dries, and then I just can take some Elmer's glue and get that instrument right in the back. Now I know this is delicate, and I've got to be real careful before I glue that instrument in. I thought I'd cut off and sand this extra little piece. Now I'm trying to get on to like a textured finish. So as the dope, this Brodak dope, just starts to dry, I just stipplize it a little bit, and what results is that you get kind of a flat, pebbly finish. And there's not many things in the cockpit area of a plane that are made to be shiny intentionally, except of course the glass. And I think every time we add a little detail to this, I get more and more excited about seeing how it's going to look when it's all done, of course. But, you know, right now, while this is drying, we have a major thing. Karen has this giant box of dishes upstairs. We have a snowstorm. I got to do snowblower stuff. And so this is going to be kind of an exciting next couple of hours, but we'll get back to this as soon as it's done. Remember, the thing I'm looking for here is different textures, different... I wouldn't want to have this whole thing and just paint it black. I'd like to have as many textures and different stipple finishes and flat and shiny. And I think we're sneaking up on having it. Well, you might think just having the most snow of the year would be enough of an adventure today, but look at what the lovely Miss Karen. How many dishes are in here, Car? Holy mackerel. What do you got, 100 dishes?
I think it looks worse than it is.
Oh, no.
Packed very carefully.
Well, and this came in this snow. The poor FedEx guy was like a snowman when he delivered this. We had to brush all the snow off the boxes. What an adventure. But what would a girl be without her dish collection? How many dishes do you think you have, Carol, altogether?
I'm not answering.
Like 5,000 or so?
I plead the fifth.
Plead the fifth, huh? 5,000 is the answer. That's the truth. What the poor birds are. They need another feeder full. I need a feeder full.
There's some more bread there.
Got more bread for them? Okay.
Not much.
Can't starve them on a day like today. Well, if Edie Oliver, who always says she wants to come up here in the winter and do snow angels, but today's the day to do snow angels, kids. You got snow out there. Now the first thing I want to show everybody, this is important. This is the building. Where's a normal cup? Take the normal cup. See, these had to match. And Karen says, I've been getting old, I need more coffee in the morning. Here's what I've been drinking. I've been drinking this size cup. Now I'm a real man, I can drink that size cup. How many, oh my God, there's 3 of these boxes. Boy, Buzz Brodeck is probably going, she's out of her mind. The dish girl. You know how much bubble wrap we're gonna have at the end? See what's in this one. How much bubble wrap we're gonna have at the end of this day? We could bubble wrap Midgley up here. Well, Karen has put 250 dishes away, and she says she's going to have more dishes than Buzz Brodeck. I don't think so. Anyway, back to our cockpit adventure. Buzz, we need to know, how many dishes do you and John really have? Do you really have more dishes than Karen? Okay, the last time we worked on this, before the Great Dish Exposition, I love the way that compass came out, the magnetic compass. That adds a nice little dimension to everything. Looks like an ashtray, doesn't it? Anyway. Now I need to look and see just how that's going to fit in there. Of course, we're going to cut the back away when we glue that in, but for right now, that's just about as good as it gets. I think that's really going to look good, I think. Now, of course, I'm not going to glue anything in permanently yet. I want to make all the parts. I want to do all the things that are going to happen here, the floor, and have parts. And then I'll glue all the parts together once they're finished, because it'll be, if you can picture what this would be like installed, and now you're going to paint, you're going to get paint all over it. So what'll happen is this will be probably the last thing I install. And I took some nice pictures for Control Line World. John Pothier is going to edit them down and clean them up if necessary, but I think that's really coming out nice now. Now the next step on this I want to lay out the floor in such a way, in fact I can lay it out cross grain, would probably be the best, the strongest. And lay it out in such a way that, let's just see if this will work. Now as I look through my book and I tried to figure out what would be the appropriate color, I noticed there's almost no set rule for the color of the floor. There's brown, there's black, there's green, and I guess on the blue Spitfires, I'm sure they painted it blue. Same thing with the seat color, there's no one color. So we have a free hand here to improvise. But we'd like not to have it zinc chromate, because then it's going to look like the walls, and I'd like not to have it black. So any color in between is going to be fine. And here's one that's brown, black, there's any number of colors. Black seems to be common, but I don't want to have black. Black is not what I want, because it's not going to contrast. Some of them are light gray, some of them are light green. And here's some that are kind of a zinc chromate, but a little browner. But I want that color to contrast because I want it to stand out. It's a little bit of a fudge. It's like doing things that you want to fake something being three-dimensional. You make the hills change color. Well, by changing this, it's going to add some depth. But I want the floor of this to be a unique color. Here's some that are just decidedly green. Again, no real set rule. Here's one with a dark blue. Now look, this has the same compass, the same magnetic compass. This is a Blenheim. Again, I know for sure because I can tell down here what the instruments are. And on the Spitfire, we have it not quite scale, but almost scale. Now, I have some brown sandpaper that might work out. What's nice is it gives a nice contrast to the instruments and all the little things in here, where if we did it black, it would kind of disappear. Again, I'm going to make up a fake floor or test floor just to see if I like this. If I don't, just make up another one. But I think this color will contrast nice with the rest of the stuff that's going to go on in here, including the zinc chromate. Now the trick at this point in time is to get everything that it fits together like a kit, but not to glue anything together. So that at the end, it's just easier to paint it and finish it and do what you have to do. And once the paint is on, then we can glue it all back together. I think this turned out, this is exceptional. This really was, I think, the nicest one yet. The floor will start off as, this is just plain old brown sandpaper, and I think some of the sparkles make it look like the anti-grit finish. At least it was on that Spitfire in Texas. They had some anti-glare on the wing that it looked like sandpaper. I'm not sure that's exactly it, but I think we're sneaking up on this. And it's a lot more fun than shoveling snow. Now this is one of the things I have, is I've had this for a long time. And you can make 2 or 3 shades of zinc chromate. You just match it to, obviously, to one of the pictures. But notice that one is lighter than the other. And so what I try to do is some of the parts with those slightly, just add a little yellow to it, or add a little blue to the darker of the two, and then I put plenty of talcum powder in there because I want this to dry as flat as possible. And usually this will take minimum 2 coats to cover because I've got it thinned as thin as possible so it gets a good bite on it. In fact, let me get the phone here. Now what happens is the talc lets this dry nice and flat. Usually, again, it needs at least 2 coats. Brush it on, let it dry between coats, and go just past the area that I'm going to see. But again, the thing that I don't want to have is that all of the zinc chromate in the cockpit area is going to be exactly the same color. I want some to be a little darker, some a little lighter. And what it does, is just like in model railroading, it gives it a little depth and a little texture that way. If you just paint it all the same color, I think you lose a little bit of the effectiveness. Now, in our case, this is going to stick up. We can just ever so slightly get this over. And this in the back is going to stick up, I think, some that you'll be able to peek in and see it. But we'll paint it anyway. And this is where it really gets to be that you have to think it through, because we don't want to glue this together and then have to do the painting. I want to do the painting. In fact, one of my neighbors, I won't mention any names because he's probably not happy about it, he put all this gingerbread up on his house, all these fancy things, and then he went to get up on a ladder and paint them, and I said, geez, Mike, why didn't you paint them first? Oh, I should have thought of that. But anyway, after 2 coats, this will start to look pretty realistic. I just let it dry
Just dry a little bit in between coats. We don't want to glue anything together. This just makes it easier to do as much of the finishing as we can before it's glued together. Well, and we're just about done with this session. We've got a you-know-what with the snowblower. And it's about time, and I don't want to do it after dark, so I've got one color mixed, a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, and as this paint dries now tomorrow or the next time we get to work on it, I'll kind of decide which I want to make the darker of the two colors and which the lighter. But it's a very subtle difference, not a giant difference. It's just enough to set it off as if there was shading, or if some had bleached in the sun and some hadn't, or if they came from two different cans of paint. Anyway, this was quite a day for Karen's Dishes, for the Cockpit, and for all the people that love snow. What a day. Now this morning, as we estimate the overnight snowfall, and of course it snowed a little bit more. Oh man, this cover is really... Every day I fix it and it keeps getting back down. But we found a great thing. I found a great trick. Karen, in these dishes that she bought, significant amount of dishes, believe me, there's some giant coffee cups, and I just had this morning my first cup with the giant Javalia coffee cup that's about 4 times what a normal coffee cup is. Man, I am wired to do cockpit detail. It's unbelievable. It's I don't know what kind of mileage I'm going to get today, but I'm looking forward to working on this cockpit. Nobody wants to be outside on a day like today. About 18 degrees. Not a great day to be an outside bird. Now, I just like to put the parts together just to get a little look at how this is all going to come together. And I think the next thing I want to do on this is I want to make up the aileron pedals. They get made out of a piece of ordinary balsa wood, so it's just a little carving and finishing job. And this first coat yesterday dried up nicely, as I like to take this apart from time to time. I mean, nothing gets attached permanently. Nothing gets glued together until we know we have all of the finishing parts and the detailing parts as far forward as we can do them. I don't want to do any painting once this is all put together, or as little as possible. Now on each one of the planes, aileron pedals can be totally different. On some of them they're just raw aluminum, some they have that sandy finish on them. Now usually there would be on the aileron pedal some kind of a toe or a heel brake. But on a Spitfire, a scale Spitfire, they're pretty common looking. They're really not that fancy. I start by just cutting up some little pieces that'll simulate the pedal. And they're oversized, of course, and from this point on now we have to figure out what the scale and size is going to be. Now what I wanted to try to do, I took a piece of scrap and I want to try to make the texture that simulates. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this realistically. Let's see how I could try to do this. What I want to do is try to cut grooves in this. In this case I just want to press them in. I'm not sure if this is going to work. But trying to come up with some different textures here. Maybe this will work. Again, these are the kind of things you've got to... there's no substitute for just trying and wasting a couple pieces of scrap wood till we come up with something that we're happy with. Now some of the aileron pedals have this texture or whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure that's going to be exactly how to do it. But I thought if I try this, let's see how it works. And if I don't like this, what I'll do is make the face of the pedal out of 64th plywood. So, but again, sometimes you just have to experiment. And I'm not sure I like that. That started off being a good idea in my mind, but I think what I'll do is I'll try to make some pedals out of, and I'll see how this works. Make this out of 64th plywood and glue it in place. And sometimes it's the smallest of the little details that just take an incredible amount of time to get the way you want it, but in the end, all this stuff that takes a lot of time in the end always seems worth it to me anyway. Now I've got this as the shape, and I can use this to my advantage now, because I can make this just a little more detailed. The plywood allows a little more detail. And sometimes the smaller the part is, the harder it is to get right. And in this case, this is one of the things when you look into the cockpit, I want to see these, but I don't want them to be overpowering to where it's something that doesn't look in proportion or in scale. Now what this is going to allow me to do when I attach this, I'll be able to cut some of that wood away. I'll be able to make this, I think I'm going to be able to make this pretty realistic, and you won't see this back part. That's the good news. And that gives it a little three-dimensional look too. I'm trying to create some kind of texture on here that would look realistic. A trick with when you're texturing something and you don't want the texture to disappear, the trick is to get the paint on as thin as possible. Now again, the idea is to get as thin a finish on here as possible, and a Sharpie, silver Sharpie marker is one of the ways of doing that. Since we don't have to deal with fuel proofness, and we like it actually to be a little bit of a dull aluminum finish, the Sharpie marker just serves our needs real well here for this. Second choice here would be to take some silver Brodak dope, and mix some talc in it, but see, that would obscure the details. That's the problem with doing it that way. Now once this dries, I'm going to paint the little supports black just so they disappear. I don't want to see them. Get into the little detail parts here a little bit. Just take some ink marker around the side, the part that you're going to see, and these are ready to glue in place. Trying to look at how these are going to fit in here. Now what I did, at first when I looked at this, the pedals were too straight up and down, so I just broke them loose and moved them in so they'd be, your feet aren't straight up and down. Didn't realize that, of course, until I looked at the book, and that's, well, when I get it all put together, that'll be a lot more convincing, I think, when that's all permanently glued together. So now we have that much done, we can move on to the next piece. And what I do is each time I do one of these pieces, I'm kind of crossing it off a list I have of all the things I want to incorporate in this cockpit detailing. Every time I just go through, I cross the next thing off. Now one of the definitive things on almost all British planes, the yoke, they call it a spade yoke.
in the past I had tried to do this with aluminum tubing and make it realistic. Well, I'm going to give it another try here. I have plenty of scraps of aluminum tubing just to see if I can create a realistic yoke, and maybe, well, we're going to have to see. Again, all these things evolve. But almost all of, all of the British planes, they always have a yoke. Now, I had done this in the past and tried to make it round, and it didn't look realistic round. Never realized, see, one of the things when you look at something several times, I thought maybe this looks more like, or maybe I would have to carve a plug. See, this is going to make too tight of a bend, so I'm not going to be able to do it that way. I'm just looking at what shape the bends should be. Maybe octagon. Maybe I'm just going to have to make a piece. What I'm going to have to do is, I can see what's going to happen. I'm going to have to carve a piece and then wrap this around if I want to try this. And sometimes you can sneak by with some of these are the round edge pliers. I call them the Costco pliers. Since this is going to get finished, it won't really be critical to get it exactly right, but we would like to get it close to the shape in the book, which this is a little flatter up here. I managed to force that down into a bigger piece of tubing, and I'm thinking if I just flatten this now, just go over to the vise and flatten this ever so little, I'll be able to put a finish on this. And once that's flat, now I can build up a little bit of a radius here with some thick CA, and I can sand the whole thing in. Sometimes getting these little details right, it really is labor intensive. And in this case, this is one I'd like to get. I really want to get this as nice as possible. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to copy off of the drawing. Carving away some of the aluminum. And most of these little parts have to be super hand finished. Anyway, even a little part like getting that radius in there right under the yoke, getting that radius right in there makes it a little more realistic. And sometimes even a little part like this, you spend hours and hours detailing it, and you think, nobody will see that, nobody will see it, and the first thing you put the plane out on display and everybody sees it. You think, ooh, I'm glad I did that. Now in this case, what we're trying to do here is just roughen this up, even it out enough to put some coats of CA and epoxy on so they'll stick real well. Because if you don't sand it, they're not going to stick real well. Now we're going to mix up some brown epoxy. I need to put a little black and a little brown dye in it to mix dark brown to be similar to the color on a Spitfire. Thing about the little colors of dye, and you can of course get these from CST, and they come in a million colors, even metal flake. CST, Aerospace Composite, they tend to separate if you let them sit on a shelf for a year at a time. Always want to stir the dye up mix the pigment in as much as you possibly can, and you need very, very little of this. Well, you need so little it's ridiculous. Now, I can just put one drop there, and that's going to be enough. Now, since we can make these DVDs over length, we're going to try to put on somewhere on this tape, maybe at the end, some of the other ways that we've done things with the Typhoon or the Spitfire or something, because I've gotten plenty of different ways of doing it. Now, we made the yoke totally differently on the Typhoon, and on some of the Spitfires it's been carved out of a piece of wood, and some of it, the bottom line is there's always more than one way to do something. In fact, there's always a lot of ways. What this will do, I hope, is put on a finish very quickly that'll be realistic. The color, in fact, I'm going to try to look at this color. It's kind of a greenish brown. If it isn't, I can just paint over this. The thing is, if you look at 10 different Spitfires, 9 of them are different. So you really have a free hand in picking how you like to do some of these details, and you can still be prototypical. Now, I'm sure, and looking at that blue Spitfire, I know one of the things on the blue Spitfire, the seat is blue, and all around the dashboard it's painted blue, almost like a custom car would be. So that's kind of neat. And I think that's the one Joe's going to go with. So Joe has a lot of free reign there. And it can still be very realistic. Now see, when this dries, I'm going to have to babysit this for a few minutes until this starts to dry off. But when it dries, it should have a really nice, realistic finish. We just keep moving it like so. This way it won't get a big run or a big drip. So the next step, once the epoxy's dry, and I've got pretty much the color I want it to have, now I can take this and I want to create the little, looks like, I don't know what we would even call a boot that this is going to go in when it goes into the floor. It just can't stick into the floor. And once I've got the size that I want, I need to just trace this out. Now I want to mix up some black epoxy and just, I want this, when I install this, to be into a hole in the floor, because this will become a tuning fork and I don't want this to break or loosen up if possible. So I'll CA this and then black epoxy around here. You know, mix up a little black epoxy and that'll take care of the handle and the boot on the yoke. Now if we were doing a wartime Spitfire with invasion stripes and guns, we'd want to have the little button. That button on the yoke is the firing mechanism. Since we're not doing a wartime version, I'm not sure. I'm not sure we need the button to fire the guns when we have no guns. Now I wanted to take this and I wanted to carefully do this. I want to very carefully, let's see how I can do this. I guess with a toothpick would be the easiest. Let's get a toothpick. Toothpicks, toothpicks. This is one of the little things. All these little details, and I think they all add up. And obviously if they don't add up for you, well, nobody's going to hate you for it. But if you do, and you can pick up some information off this video, and obviously off other ones, even better. And I'm not so sure even some scale models, like the people that just build scale, you know, couldn't pick up some stuff off of this. Or people that just want to have something a little bit different. They're just not looking to have the same Suzuki that everybody else has. They want the Ducati or the Ferrari. And just get one little toothpick amount in what would be the rubber part of the spade handle, and we'll kind of babysit this for 4 or 5 minutes. And once this dries up, then we'll move on. In fact, we'll have one of those giant cups of this. Wait till you see the size of these cups Karen's got. No wonder I'm wired for sound here. But maybe I'll get more work done. A dyed epoxy always leaves a nice finish in a matter of 10-15 minutes, one coat. Now while it's drying, I want to get some dimensions, some rough dimensions to make this seat off. See, the seat is going to go here in front of the radio compartment. And I need the height of the seat to be, looks like 2.5, a little more than 2.5. Now the easiest way here, since I know the dimension this way, and I need to figure out the dimension this way, I need to make a little pattern up for my seat. And I can use this, use the fuselage itself, use the parts that I've already made, even though they're not assembled. And I need to then be sure I have the proper location for the yoke, and then the front of the seat, and then the height. So I need to, it's just easy to make a paper pattern and work off a paper pattern. So this is the little seat, the little paper pattern. And what I need to do is find out, I would need to, look at this, I need to leave enough room for the yoke. And I think we'll have it. I think that'll be fine. So now I'm going to spend a little time off camera. I got a bunch of this balsa wood that already has a little bit of a curve in it, because I'd like to make this like a prototypical seat that has its sheet metal and it has a little bit of a curve and even a little bit of curve on the bottom, but I don't know which one of these sheets is going to be appropriate or even close. In fact, we ought to take these apart. That's why I save all these little extra mold overs and things like that. And I'm sure we'll have one in here that'll be pretty close to what we want. But we've got enough of them to do some cutting out and making some prototype parts here before we decide what we want to have exactly. And from the seat pattern, which was flat, we made it slightly curved. And I'm going to have to attach this, just tack it together with thin CA and see what it looks like once it's sitting in the little cockpit area. Now I got the rough framing size of what I want to have. Hardened all the edges with thin CA. I want to do some more detailing on the seat, but unfortunately, Karen has made us a delicious lunch, and I'll need a little break. Then I want to decide how I want to detail the seat even more. That looks like it's going to be nice. Oh, and let me show you these big cups, Karen. These are unbelievable, these cups. Look at the size of these coffee cups. There's a normal cup. Here's the new Windy wired for sound cup.
This is Karen's cup.
What's wrong with that? No wonder I'm so nervous all day. How many of these cups do you have now? Look at all these dishes she has. Beautiful, beautiful. Her dishes make her so happy.
They do.
A girl can't be happy without millions and millions and millions of dishes. Now that is a cup of coffee. That is truly a cup of coffee. Is that really a cup or is that a soup bowl? That might be a soup bowl. We don't even know.
Well, it's perfect for you.
Now, if I get time later tonight, of course, we have a full day's work today. If I get some time tonight, I'll work on detailing out that seat, but right now, the email and the mail are calling loud and clear. Get to work, Ertnowski. Now, this is nice in doing today's email. Get some nice pictures of the progress on Joe's ship. He's getting ready to work on his canopy, or he's already started. I can see he's got the plastic all cut out already. And he even snuck in painting a rudder. I can't believe that. Very cool. Now I'm guessing what Joe is doing here is trying to get the pilot the right size. In the side view, that's an early spit. Trying to get the proportion right. Ours won't have a pilot.
That looks like a nice pilot. And Giorgino made us the pilots for the Seafires years ago. I don't know, maybe this is still maybe one he's got. Yeah, we'll see the next time we ever get together. And Joe's got his dashboard pretty well set up. Nicely detailed. As everything Joe does, right on the money. That's a nice set of pictures from Joe. But right now is a good time to take a break. I wanted to put, and because these are oval-length DVDs, I wanted to put on some outtakes, and these are just a few outtakes from the Typhoon canopy construction. There's some stuff that complements this information. Anyway, interesting stuff, and it shows that there are definitely more than one or two ways to do any of this. Now it's the time in our Typhoon model that we're starting to plan what we're going to do for some cockpit detailing. Now in my case, it's always good if you can, and I've got plenty of Typhoon books, get some idea of what the real Typhoon cockpit or the model that you're making looks like. The closer you can make it to the real thing, of course, the better, in my estimation, the better. Now we have a lot of videos on doing turtle deck type cockpits, a lot doing bubble canopies, a lot doing sliding canopies that open and close. So we have a wide variety of video to check out if you're really wanting to do a super canopy. And it's always, one of my goals is to make it as realistic as possible. Make it look like a cockpit, not just a bunch of map makers and map pins and stuff. Within the confines of, we don't want it to be too heavy, and we don't want it to take 4.5 years to build. And it's always handy if you have a schematic or a factory drawing or something you can rely on. In this case, we have a pretty good rendition of what the instrument panel would look like on if we were doing a scale model. And it isn't important that we make it exactly scale. What's important is that it looks like a real airplane canopy when we're done. Now the Typhoon cockpit canopy is very similar to the Seafire canopy, even in the way it opens. Maybe they even use the same canopy, I don't know. So we have plenty of drawings to work from. Let me just go and do a little bit of the history of how this evolved. It's an evolutionary process on my part of doing these in each ship time after time. And one of the things we have is we have a lot of models in the shop that have various types of canopies. The Strega canopy, very simple, easily duplicatable in maybe 1 or 2 sessions. Lightweight, and a commercially bought canopy that you can buy from SIG, or I think Brodak handles canopies now too. For many years I used to just paint the canopy on, and that's certainly one of the choices you have. But if you really like, and I do, this is the Red Baron of course, on some of the semi-scale planes we've made, we try to make the cockpit, it's not really a scale model, but what we would like it to be is when you look in that it looks like a scale model. And we certainly don't want to make it so complex and cumbersome or heavy that it has a negative effect on the model in some other ways. And of course the one we really were impressed the most with, the Seafire, which we could fly with the cockpit open or shut, and had the pilot from Giorgino. Now the Miss Ashley cockpit had one feature that I really thought was pretty inventive, is you could, through two little screws inside the plane, take the cockpit details out and put them in the next Miss Ashley. Now, needless to say, when we did the carbon plane, one of the factors is we were running out of time. And so we went with just having a carbon fiber. I wanted as much carbon fiber on a plane as possible. And that was one of the ways we achieved it, by just making a carbon fiber cockpit of a version of the wood fuselage Miss Ashley. And that is a nice, unique feature. I really liked the way that worked. I thought that's something that had a lot of good features. This was a very nice by the way, that there's a video available on doing this. There's video for doing all the cockpits if you really want to go and push it to the limit. Even the old Sidewinder had a relatively nice cockpit, a pilot. And if you have the time, now we have the time for one reason. In the last month or so, we've tried like heck to catch up on this Typhoon project, and we've also at the same time hit some terrible weather. The storms have been just one right after another, so we do have extra shop time that normally we wouldn't have. Even the old sweeper from 1966 had quite an elaborate little cockpit. I think one of the things you need when you're going to do a cockpit, you have to have a mind's eye view, or even better, a video or some pictures of things that you'd like to include in your little cockpit detailing. And that's what we're going to try to do on this video, is give you some ideas and show you the way we've evolved doing it over the years that seems to have worked pretty well for us. Certainly not the only way, but one of the ways that is really duplicatable by an average modeler. I remember in doing the Spitfire project how excited I was about having a cockpit detail right. And Joe Adamusco again too had some super cockpit detail. And in the last video to this series, we were tidying up all the little details, fixing all the little silver flaws, so we're pretty much ready. We want to look at check out the videos from the previous couple of years, check out the models we have in a Spitfire bedroom, and then we'll have a pretty good idea of what we want to do. We're even going back to the first Valkyrie, and this was in the early 60s. This is the one I finished. I refinished a plane that this was Harold's original Valkyrie. I flew this at I think the 61 Nats, but I remember thinking, wow, this was the first plane I ever made that had a real cockpit and pilot and some instruments, and I really was excited about that possibility. And I know Ken Tyson has a really nice pilot in this Strega. I think Tommy Looper did it, but I'm not sure. But just it's a nice little detail touch. And I certainly think it's worth the effort if you have the time and the inclination to do it. Joe Adamusco in his Spitfire, this was the 96 Spitfire, he had a shrunken down stunt news in the cockpit. I don't think you can see it here. As if the pilot were reading stunt news, and it was the stunt news that had his picture on the cover. I think it had the two Spitfires on the cover, I'm not sure. But I thought that was kind of a cute touch, and I'm always looking for cute little things like that to set the model apart. So it's always a good idea before you actually physically start laying out your ideas for the canopy, look around, get as many pictures as you can. If you have some of the videos, check them out. Because a lot of times you get all done doing something, you say, oh, I remember I could have done that easier or quicker or cheaper or something. My F-16 from '84 had a totally elaborate cockpit. Totally elaborate. That was talk about a labor of love. It's just a thought, if you decide to paint a canopy on rather than make a plastic, more realistic rendition. One of the thoughts I always had was the color that the canopy is painted. This was my first plane, the first one that ever won the concourse, by the way. And one of the things I did is I put a color on the cockpit that appeared nowhere else in the plane. The cockpit color was not one of the trim colors, and I thought that just really set it apart in the crowd. Thing to keep in mind with any cockpit detail, it's a focal point of the model. It's one of the first things people are going to look at. Now in this case we even have the ripples in the vinyl seat cover. And what I thought was just my most unique effort, the idea I got from Keith Trossel of making the canopy open and shut on rails. It's all available on other tapes for somebody that really would like to push it to the limit, or just do an amount that would make you make your models, you know, come apart in a crowd. And the thing that's nice is every one of these models has won the Concourse Award, and I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but it couldn't have hurt. So let's get down there and start working on our canopy details. Basically, the reason we have a little extra time, we are in snowbird mode. We've had the two biggest storms in the last 5 years here. We've been shoveling every day, and when I get done shoveling, there's nothing more fun than working on cockpit details. Of course, it's always handy to have a nice library of books that you can refer to for ideas, pictures, things that'll be of some value. I always save all the books, and I want to thank everybody that's contributed literature into my library. All summer we feed the fish in this fish pond, and right now, believe me, they're predicting snow for the next 3 days. We may get this cockpit detail done by the time it stops snowing. Now, just a couple of quick thoughts. There's a lot of times that it's appropriate to do a cockpit. Sometimes you want to do it when the fuselage is in raw wood. In this case, we wanted to bring it up to silver before I actually lay out the cockpit. The reason is I want to take a 3 view, and I want to get the relationship, what percentage the cockpit is from the front to the back. Before you can lay out a cockpit, you've got to know where it's going to go. Now, in some designs, like a Nobler, for instance, it's pretty predetermined where it is if you have a turtle deck. In the case of a bubble canopy, a lot of times just sliding it forward or back the slightest bit changes the whole look of the airplane. So the first thing I want to do is I want to go measure off a drawing what percentage the canopy is from the front to the back. And remember, a Typhoon is it's a large airplane, so the canopy is smaller in proportion to the plane, say, than a Mustang is. If the canopy is too far forward, it starts to look like a jet. If it's too far back, well, you can figure that out. You'll lose the look that you're looking for. We always have a box with a whole bunch of canopies in it and different things that we've molded up here. I thought at one time, and I'm not sure I can or can't, I thought I'd possibly be able to use a Seafire canopy because it's very similar, but when I looked at it from a lot of different angles, it's relative to the size of the plane, it seems like it's on the big side. So what I did, I ordered up one of every reasonable size of the SIG canopies. When I just roughly looked at one of the Seafire canopies, I just thought it just was too large relative to the size of the plane. The dimension from front to back was way out of proportion, and it sat up way too high. Because in essence, on a Seafire, it's probably the same canopy, but a Typhoon is a much larger plane. So what I did, and I'm not sure, see, the first decision I have to make, of course, is not only where the canopy is going to be. If you put it up here, it starts to look like a jet. You move it too far back, well, I don't know what it looks like Tsunami. But it's always good to have, and I just want to show this, a bunch of canopies. Canopies are real cheap, so it pays to have a couple of each. And I'd never buy one of each. I'd buy 2 or 3, because if you cut one and you cut it a little too short, then you're basically stuck. So by having one of each here, the extra ones we'll use up for something. We'll use them for ashtrays or whatever. But I always want to have as many choices as possible. Now see, this canopy is a 7-inch World War II. It's a little bit smaller. That's probably going to be closer to what we want. I looked at the 7-inch one, just roughly. It just looks a little too small before I even cut it up. So that kind of narrows it down to possibly the 9-inch canopy. So before I cut one up, and I have 2 of each,
before I cut one up, I'm going to try to go with, see the percentage. This is if the canopy turns out to be that big, it starts to look like an aerobatic plane. And if it's too small, well, I'm not sure, you know, it's going to make the plane look bigger than it has to be. But it looks like the compromise we're going to have is going to be the 9-inch. And it's got really close to being the right shape. Usually, what I usually try to do is just rough cut the canopy and then try to decide, do I want it to tilt down or tilt up? In this case, I'd like it the front to tilt down. So then I take little cuts off the front just to get it roughed in place until it kind of fits down on the fuselage the way I like. By the way, this is why I always get more than one canopy, because let's just make an example up. Supposing I cut this too far, well, it's handy not to have to either run to the hobby shop, or in a case of if you mold it, have to go mold another one. And we molded enough of those canopies. Just too bad we don't have the time. I wish we had the time to make a unique mold for this plane, but just we're running out of time. Once I have this roughly put in position and I know about where this should be, a real important step is to turn it over and sight down and see if these two lines are equal. Because if one is bowed and one is flat, when you mount the canopy, it'll have a twist in it. So by putting the red tape on here, it just helps my eyeball look at it. And any spot here I have that's a little high, I can trim it down so that I can throw this across the room. So that when I lay this down, it tends to be flat on both sides. Both equal, not twisted up or twisted down. It helps getting the canopy on straight. Those are parallel. Now I want to get the curve. This is one of the most important things. I don't want to cut it because I want to get this edge to lay down flat here. So for right now, I just want to get this curve roughed in. If this curve is wrong, what will happen is when you go to put the canopy on, you'll put a bend in it and more than likely it'll crack. So, you know, that gives me a much wider glue pattern to glue to. Once this is real close, now I can go to the next level. I put on some sticky back paper, rubbed it on my shirt a few times so it doesn't pull a paint up. And what this does, rather than having an edge, the joint will be parallel now. Now on a wood fuselage, we usually cut a little groove in a fuselage and drop this down in. We're not going to be able to do that, but that's on the Seafire tapes and the Spitfire tapes. Any of the wood fuselage tapes, Strega. On carbon, we have a little bit different technique that we're going to use. This gets us the final little angle. Okay, I also have another option because I have the original blank. This was the original plug from the mold. And what I'm doing now is I want to get just a final fit where I can really press down on this. You could use a baseball bat. I've seen that as one of the tricks. But here's the reason for doing this is now in here you can see we have a serrated, not a serrated, but a rough edge. Because we're going to be doing a butt joint. We're not going to have a little ditch. If we had a ditch, this wouldn't be as important. But we're going to have a rough, I want a rough surface because we're going to use epoxy to hold that down. I want this curve to be a really good match, and I want it to be a rough joint, not a smooth joint. So having the plug for the mold is certainly not going to hurt us. You can see what a relatively nice tight fit, because you don't want to fit where you got to do this or something that's going to put stress on the cockpit. You'd like it to just drop in and have a relatively nice tight fit. Decision is how far forward or back do we want to have this, and I'm just going to do it by a percentage of rudder to the back of the canopy and try to
try to figure out what these two percentages are. Trying to finalize where I want this to be front to back, front to back. And sometimes, see in this case, if we referenced off the leading edge, because the nose is longer than it really is on a scale model, you can't really do that. So we've got to kind of, again, it's that fudge thing. We've got to just fudge it back just a little bit. Area in the back is certainly in proportion. It's longer than the area to the front. And this is kind of a critical thing if you're trying to do semi-scale, or if you just want a certain look. Best way is always to put it on the floor, put it on a table, stand back. If you have a few other people around, get them to help you determine exactly where you think that should be. Because if it's wrong, boy, it doesn't have to be wrong by much and it looks terrible. The problem is sometimes from one angle it looks okay, another angle it doesn't. From the top it looks different. You've got to really do a wide range of angles before you're happy, because once you make the commitment, once we lay out the spot where the cockpit's going to be, we really can't move it more than about 1/16 of an inch back or forth without making a big problem. In this case, we have a look that we're looking for, and then I've used a little catchphrase of the Bulldog. A Typhoon is a not a long, sleek, narrow plane. It's kind of like a Bearcat or a Thunderbolt. It's kind of a heavily armed, fat plane, and this, I think, is going to capture the look. That carbon, it just never stops giving off dust, and I don't want that inside the cockpit. Once I get everything all sealed up, this will help seal it up. I can just float on a coat like this. I don't want to have big paint drops and drools in there. Easiest to work in this configuration rather than have the floor and the dashboard and every seat installed. And while this is drying, we'll work on some of our little details. Very convenient to work on this box as a separate unit. When you're letting this dry, always let it dry upside down, because then what happens is you get the little buildup of paint in this side, which you really don't see when you look in a cockpit. You'd like the other side to have as much detail as possible, so I don't want to have a big buildup of paint in there. And when this dries, it's a flat paint. It's going to look, I hope, a lot like what the inside of a Typhoon or other World War II airplane would kind of look like. I'll just let it dry upside down. Always good to mark the jar too, so you don't by mistake use this as a painting something else. I always have, while it's drying, I always have a box of little spare parts that I made. These are spare switches, and I always keep the cockpit, all the cockpit stuff in one bag because a lot of people borrow it. And I have bought, this is a little walkie-talkie from a dollhouse store that maybe I can use. It's kind of detailed. In fact, I bought two of them. Some heavy plastic for what else. You always need a lot of little stuff. I don't know how to describe it. But this is one of the drawings I always use. And this is a P-51 cockpit, but it's very typical. And the next thing I want to make a trim wheel, because it's very easy to make, and it sets out very well in a cockpit. Very easy to make. I got some extra instruments here. Believe it or not, nobody used up all the old instruments. I can't believe it. Anyway, that's going to be the elevated trim wheel, and I'll make that next. Laminate together 5 pieces of 64th plywood. It's good you can use up little scraps of plywood. I try to and even though this is not really important, I laminate them in all different grain angles, then trace out the shape of the trim wheel. Once they're all glued together, you can just take my circle template, figure out what diameter we want to make this. That's a little big. Now you can see I just have the little wheel. I need to dress this off just a little bit. Then I'm going to take a parting wheel and put the trim notches in it. It's a very easy part to make, and it really does dress up the cockpit because it's a focal point, and it's very prototypical. Typhoon has one, Spitfire has one, Mustang has one.
We just happen to have those nice P51 drawings available. Need to be able to hold these little detail parts, so what I do is I just CA it to a part. Now I can hold this in my fingers while I put the serrations on it. And with a parting wheel, and I just eyeball it up. What I do, I start the notches first, make sure I have them evenly spaced, and then just go ahead and make them a little bit deeper. Now what I'm doing, I'm putting a little bit of a recess in the middle of this. By the way, this has been from Al Raby's plans and redrawn by Bob English. This is where we're getting some of our ideas. Little time left while that's drying. This is just roughly what I'm going to do is just grind a hole first and then go out rough cut this and grind the rest in. There's no other easy way I know how to do this, and the material with the grains all in different direction makes for a nice solid part. This is of course the yoke, and that's very similar to what the real yoke looks like. And that's step one, just rough it out. We're not following any real plan here. Now I'll go and overcut this with the saw. And the kind of the rest of it I just need to dress off. Really, in essence, we're carving it. Now, it just takes a little time to shape this. A nail file is a good Bud McKnight sanding stick here. And of course it's delicate, and for almost sure we're going to break it at some point in time and have to CA it, but I'm going to radius it all off, and this is what the yoke in a Typhoon really looks like. They call it a shovel yoke. A couple of coats of thin and thick CA. I'll build this up to have a nice finish, prototypical finish, and then it'll be ready to paint. Once it dries a little bit, I'll just sand this down. He's getting his adult feathers at last. See those little orange quills? I'll put you in a cockpit of a plane. Enough, we got cockpits to work on. Adult feathers. This is the mount that the yoke sits on, because in the real plane this rotates back and forth, and I'm just going to use a washer to simulate the bearing surface up there. It's pretty prototypical, by the way. So impressed with those adult feathers on that bird. It's nice, we can use the little forceps to hold it in position. I want to get a radius on this because on a real plane this is a rubber actually, and this will all get cut off. This is just a little piece we leave on so we have something to... One of the hard things to do with these little parts is figure a way of holding them. One of the best tricks for doing cockpit detail is you want a variation of texture. You don't want everything to look flat or everything to look shiny. You want a variation. And this is one of the ways you can disguise the eye. This is 5-minute epoxy with a little bit of black dye in it, ordinary epoxy dye. And what this we're trying to do is have this look like rubber. Since it's one of the focal points of the plane, it's something that people are going to look at. And there's always a chance that they'll have somebody judging that's a scale judge or something that'll, you know, they'll kind of favor something that looks scale. They know, for instance, a Typhoon doesn't have a yoke. It has a shovel, the shovel yoke like we have right here. Again, all little details. Now this is the end of the first day of working on this. And I think we're pretty much at the end of this day. We're going to work on tomorrow, some more detail. This will get painted once it dries. And we'll just let that dry. And it has that shiny look. Once it dries, we'll just make this the zinc chromate color. And that's a pretty good simulation of a rubber part. Want it to even be a little shinier? Just a slight little bit of heat from the low setting. Thing I'm going to have time for tonight is just to make up a little emergency brake lever. I bent the pin, put it in between two sheets of 64th plywood, and just fill a gap with glue. And just sandwich that in and fill that inside with either a piece of 64th plywood or some glue. Now I just got a rough tracing of it. Just cut this out with a scissor and grind the rest with a Dremel tool. And one of the things you can do, you can just kind of carve a hand grip in there. Oh, don't you love that sound? It's these little detail parts, I think, that really make whatever amount of effort you're going to put into the dashboard, a couple days, a week, a month, a year, the rest of your life, whatever, make it all worthwhile. When you look in there and there's little details and people say, hey, how did he do that? Now the next step, I'm going to mix some epoxy with some red dye in it and just dip this in so it looks like a rubber handle, the way it would be on a real plane. That's what's nice about having epoxy with dye in it. It leaves a really, I think, a realistic finish for this kind of thing. You certainly wouldn't want to paint the plane with this or anything, but little details. So a little bit of dye, commercially available any place they sell fiberglass supplies. Mix it with any kind of resin, even 5-minute. I want to just see what I'm doing to get the, let me see if I can get a good close-up on this. Just rub them before the before the epoxy dries. It puts the little handle. This reminds me of one little thing. We made a little easy just handle one time and put it in Mike Rogers' Cockpit. Made a little line reel on an easy just handle. That was kind of a cool thing. Anyway, that's it for today. We'll be back in the shop tomorrow. Day 1 of the Great Cockpit event is over. Then, needless to say, we got a nice little head start on getting some of the details we want to include in this model. To figure out how we're going to make up this dashboard. Started by laminating up some 16th balsa. See, the grain is going that way on one piece, that way on the other piece. Drilled some holes similar to the way we did it. Just made a rough random instrument layout. And this will be the base of our dashboard, whatever it is that you want to call it. And this will fit right in here. And I'm just trying to I'm trying to rough this out right now. The next step, I want to take some thick CA, and I want to carefully, because it'll dry slow, I want to get a good bond on this. I'm going to glue it right to a piece of 600 wet and dry sandpaper. Now the reason for this is it gives a texture, and a real dashboard would have some kind of anti-glare panel. And this would be a good simulation of that, I hope. Sanding these parts, it's easiest if you just sand it away from the sandpaper. When you do it that way, I don't know, sandpaper tends to peel away at the corners. So I want to get the edge on this relatively straight. Then I want to get in there and cut the holes out with a brand new blade. It's best if you just go right from the back and just rough this out. And the last little bit we'll do with the stone, of course. Just get the holes roughed out. Of course, the edges are very rough when you do this, so I want to go in from this side with the stone and just clean these out. Now you got to just ease the stone in. The idea of this whole operation is to have it three-dimensional. When you just glue the instruments to the fascia, it doesn't really look realistic in my book. This gives it a nice three-dimensional look. Now I try to blacken the edges here with an ordinary Sharpie marker of some kind, so that when I look from the front, and I've got to look from a lot of angles here, it's easier to do it from the back because you don't get a smear on the front. If you do, it's hard to get it off. Okay, we finally have the dashboard made. Now this is from this sheet that really were Mustang plans. Now I just cut the instruments out that look like real instruments, but there's a real nice thing. You can buy a thing of J-Tech instruments, take them to a photo enlarger and have them enlarged 2%. Bigger, 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 smaller, smaller, smaller. Then you'll have a nice, for the cost of buying one sheet of instruments. Now believe it or not, I did this. I went to Staples and they wouldn't make a copy of the thing. So I just said, yeah, this is really high tech. I went over to the Xerox machine, dial in 2%. But anyway, these I'm copying right off the plans. Because we're going to have plastic in front of them, you don't really get to see them, you know, in the same way you would if you were up close and personal. The glass really gives a nice reflection. But you get a good assortment, or you can just buy a set of Al Raby's plans here and you're done. To do is 1 drop of thick CA. 1 drop. I don't want to have a lot on there. As I say it, I get too much on there. It doesn't matter. I just want a thin amount. Then I take a pin, an ordinary pin, and try to drop the instrument right into position, and then glue my finger to the part. It's really high tech. Well, I need to find a piece of clear plastic like canopy material the size of the dashboard so that each one of the dial faces will have that glass that reflects when you look at it. Now in this case we don't have any real flat. It's pretty flat here. This is an old Nobler canopy. So I'll cut a piece of this out, the exact shape of the dashboard. The trick here is just to glue just a couple of spots. You don't need to glue the whole thing. You don't want to get it smeared up. In fact, I'm looking on top of each instrument. See, I have a fingerprint here, but you're not going to see it. Any little imperfections in the plastic, it's easy to wipe them off right now. Now as I anticipate where I'm going to put the glue on this, I just want a couple of dots of thick CA. I don't want to have this, I don't want to get the glue out over the clear part of the instruments. But see how nice when you're looking at this, especially in the sunlight, and the glass on the instruments reflects back at you. Kind of looks realistic in my opinion anyway. Having that reflection is the whole purpose for putting that glass in there. Now I want to trim the rest of the overage off. Just make sure I don't have any of the glue on the glass of the instruments.
And that's the base of a relatively nice, even if this were in a Nobler or a Thunderbird or whatever, a nice dashboard. But we're going to take it to the next level. I want to get all of these edges nice and even before I go on to the further detailing of this. Next step I want to do is I want to get the grain cross grain. I want to make a floor. I'm not going to glue it in place yet. I want to make a floor, and as the texture for the floor, one of the things I like to use is some other grade of sandpaper, which we'll see they're all darker or lighter depending on the grade, and that gives a nice anti-glare look when you look into the cockpit box, the part of the floor that you can see. Now what I tried, I just want to see if I want to, first I mark which side is forward because I'm going to put the aileron pedals on that side. I wouldn't want to have them under the seat. I wanted to see I never glued it. The problem is never glue it together until you really have to, because it's easier to work on it in parts and make it like a little take-apart cockpit. Now the next thing I want to do is I'm just making sure I have this the way I want it. I want to make up little aileron pedals, simulated aileron pedals. This is, let's see what it is. I don't even know. Shows you what I know. Always be prepared. Norton 100B sandpaper, and it has a nice, looks like, and because you can use whatever we don't use here for sandpaper. But that has the look of a textured cockpit interior, and I want to get as many textures in there as possible. And what happens if you put black down there, it kind of, everything fades, where this shows that we have a very realistic instrument panel. And we have the little holes for the aileron pedals. But now is when the videos come in really handy. I can look at some of the other videos of the cockpit detail, and I can make sure I'm not leaving out a part or I'm not making it harder than it has to be. Having a nice video library is a giant asset. In this case, I can look in at, this is I think last year's Spitfire, some of the knobs, some of the levers, the brake lever. And a lot of times you do forget, and see the little dashboard even comes out. That one was done a little bit differently, because remember that isn't a take-apart aeroplane, but the video library, worth its weight in gold. Now I want to make sure, okay, this is the kind of little stuff. First off, we need to put the aileron pedals in the front of the plane. I just cut some little pieces of scrap wood, and I want to make sure they're going to be angled, of course. So the rest is I can just carve these up out of chunks of little scrap wood. Now after a little jingling around here, I want to make sure I'm not making them too big, because they would be going underneath the dashboard. Now the last thing is I need to cut some of this material away, because I don't want to see that on the side. It's going to kind of be, I'm going to make the little pedals for the front and make this flat black so you don't see it. I need to cut some of that away though. What's good with this is a rub-a-dub laundry marker. That gets a nice dull finish on it. And there's no dry time, it's dry instantly. Now I'm going to make the pedals themselves out of 64th plywood. And what I'm going to try to do is cover them with aluminum, that sheet aluminum, which should give them a very realistic look. I just want to make sure I haven't made them too big. No, just about right. Now I'll make the pedal just a 64th bigger. Just a piece of 64th plywood. I'm getting a nice edge on it, and then I want to get that aluminum, which you probably could use aluminum foil in a pinch, but it'll give it a nice, again, I'm looking for a lot of different textures. The thing that destroys a lot of nice little cockpits is you only have one or two different textures, and it just looks fake. The more textures you can put in there, it kind of, any model maker will try to get as many textures as you can involved. Keeps your eye busy all the time trying to figure out, how did he do that? These surgical blades, I got these from Dave Midgley. I'm not even sure where you could buy them. But what's nice about it is the aluminum that they come in. How creative is this? You just First off, you can use the blade for whatever. But it's the soft aluminum that makes for some very realistic parts. Hey, get out of there! I'm looking through the eyepiece all of a sudden, I see a bird's head. God, amazing how you get anything done. Now you just do this with your finger, and you could cut yourself on this, so you want to be careful. And it really does leave a nice simulated look of real aluminum. CA that down. Now what I'm going to do is cut a little bit around it and wrap it back over itself, like wrapping a Christmas present. Side was, and I wasn't happy with it. I thought I was going to be able to put pen lines in this. But I like the look that it has the little lines. You really can't see it probably on the camera. It has the little lines like the real plane does, at least in the photo. It has the lines, so I'm just going to leave the lines in there. It seems to look the best is to just take an ordinary ballpoint pen and put the lines. The real plane has serrations, of course, I guess so the pilot's feet don't slip off the aileron pedals. And then just wipe the ink out, because it leaves an impression in a very soft aluminum. It's something you can't fake with your eye, is the look of real metal. You can paint it any color you want, but let me show this. And all we do is clean off the ink with a Q-tip. And here's what the little pedals, they don't have to be finished in the back, of course. But they do have the texture that a real aileron pedal, as these were moving forward and back in a plane, would have. Where we're actually going to glue these in, I want to cut that little piece of sandpaper away. It will not really stick well to the sandpaper as well as to the wood. Now once that's in there, you can see the reflection of the aluminum, and that's what I want, is when it looks, when you look in the sun, look like what aluminum pedals, or I'm sure they were zinc chromated and the paint wore off on most of them. Most of the pictures you have, they almost bare metal. Anyway, that's about where we're going to end this little session. We're going to be back tonight working on this. But we have bigger fish to fry, if you know what I mean, in the real estate market. And it's the little accessory lights that they do appear in real planes. Now the way I simulate them is with little jewels from a craft store. In the past I've bought little packs of jewels and these little rhinestones, and what I didn't realize, there was a better source for it, is the local nail supply place that sells, let me get these all in here, that sells the girls, you put these on their fingernails, the ones that want to look like, you know, high-tech fingernail jobs. But anyway, they're the perfect size, and the difference is the fingernail rhinestones, the ones I used to buy, had a point and you'd have to drill a hole. These are flat, and with one little drop of epoxy they should adhere right in place. Now I want some red ones, of course, and they're the perfect scale. We just have to figure out exactly where we want to have these. And like any jewel accessory, when the sun hits it just right, boy, that just really adds a nice look to it. And it's the combining of textures that really makes this more realistic than it otherwise would be if it was just one flat color. Kind of happy with the way this little guy is working out. And there's nothing here, there's certainly nothing that costs any money. There's nothing here that's out of the realm of an average modeler. It's just time. This is, I think, the third or fourth day. I try to spend a couple hours each night, each afternoon, working on it. And reviewing the videos for even more ideas. Yeah, I have infinite variation. Now this would help if you were making a plane with a push rod. A lot of times a push rod's in the way, like on a Miss Ashley, for instance. So this can allow you to set this at any exact angle you want, front to back, side to side. When you're happy with it, you can just tack that, and when you take that out, the tabs will be attached. And once they're pulled apart, then you can put a permanent glue seam here and maybe even a little reinforcement. Take these bolts out. I'll have my
little mounts temporarily set in place. That's why it's always good to put a little drop of oil on those bolts. And that comes right out. Now the tabs are set in place. Now I can make a permanent glue seam. Maybe even put a little reinforcement here. I'm wondering if I should do that. I just ground these tabs down. Made this a permanent glue seam here. We'll paint this all later. What this is going to allow me to do now is set the seat height to the most attractive angle, and the seat will just get glued to the back. I don't need to even glue it to the floor of this. Anyway, I hope you're getting some good ideas for this for your next plane. This I find to be one of the more enjoyable parts of building a plane. Piece of 64th plywood. I'm going to make the visor, which goes on top of the panel. Now what I like about the video, this is the Seafire video where we're putting a box of pizza in the cockpit with the pilot. Anyway, I thought that was one of my finest hours, the Seafire cockpit. 2 concourse wins, by the way. I'm sure the cockpit had something to do with that. This is the little like a sun visor. It's similar to how the real plane is. A little bit of an edge, and we'll do that finishing when we go to paint that. So far so good though. The next thing I want to do is glue the seat in, get the height that I want, and glue it right to the back. Making up one more piece, which will probably be the last piece I get to do today. This is the rib that goes behind the pilot's head. And it's the best, of course. I drill the holes and then enlarge them with in this case it's a stone. Tends not to break up the plywood as much. We used almost a whole sheet of 64th plywood on this. Anyway, we're still under a ½ ounce, so we're safe. I don't want to start making this too elaborate. But I really do like the fact that when people look in there, they say, "Oh, how'd you do that?" Always nice. And of course, maybe the last thing tonight would make the brace that goes back here. Now remember, that can't attach. I have to leave that just pressed up against that. These parts are always easier to paint before you glue them in, and once the second coat's starting to dry, I'll do that stipple thing. There's a little bit too much paint on here to do it right now. Just to give it a rough, dull finish. The talc keeps it dull, the stippling keeps it a little bit rough. As you can probably imagine, the inside of World War II planes, they didn't buff them out, that's for sure. This part I made today was the support for behind the pilot's head, and I made it out of a piece of spare carbon fiber with balsa laminate, so if we decide to leave that carbon fiber color, this will kind of match. Not that that's a real important thing, but that's all we're going to get to do today. What's nice about having all these books, and this is the model we're portraying, so we're going to get all these outlines on the outside of the cockpit with tape, then flip it over and hand paint the inside. Okay, all the tape is on. Now we're going to flip this over and just with a brush very carefully paint one thin layer of the zinc chromate on the inside. If you weren't comfortable doing this, again, you could mask it off. But because this is a part that I just want to go right up to the edge of the red, and then I use this piece. Look at those steady hands. Years of art training. I'll tell you, what a guy. Now, I don't want to get any dope in that flat edge that we're going to use to glue it down, because we're only going to have a very small glue footprint into the carbon. We don't have the ability to make a trough there. And everything else is drying up. I've walked around many times, looked for some more details, looked through my books again. I like the little thermos bottle. Anytime you're in a dollhouse store, you should always look around for something and just put it in a box for all the stuff that you think you're going to use in the future for cockpit detailing. And you always have to make the decision when you're making a model just how much time and energy and effort you want to put into it. Well, in this case, we feel like we'd like to make this as good as we possibly can, and little details like painting inside the cockpit, when that's reversed, I think all of that adds a little special dimension to it. Whole inside painted. Now once I take the tape off, that'll then become my pattern. It's a reverse pattern. I want to make sure I don't have any dope along this edge, so I'll just hit that with some sandpaper before I glue this on. I can take the tape off the edges here. Once we get this installed, I think that's really going to look... That's about as nice as I could have ever expected. The total weight was under 1/2 ounce. I wanted to put some rivet heads, add some details down in the cockpit area. It is a normal inclined pen with a number 45 tip. Now most of these I just do freehand the same way as you would do inclines. If you really want to be fussy, of course you could do with a ruler. Just adds another little detail in. And the more things you can do to keep your eye busy, I just think it looks more realistic. As soon as we're done putting some incline details in here, the next step is going to be to glue the canopy on. And I hope we're going to get to do that today, but we've had one of those days where the phone rings off the hook. Now when I make this bulkhead that's going to actually seal this area up, I can only go down, because of the push rod being here, maybe an inch and 1/10 maybe, before I run into interference. And then I have a piece that's an exact copy of this, so what I need to do is take this piece and add an inch to it. So what I'm trying to do is just do a little interpolation here. These are the rough angles. Best to make the piece a little bit oversized. For the flavor, and it really would be impossible to do a totally scale cockpit as if this was a scale model. We want to get some of the flavor. And if you look in the back of a Spitfire, you see a lot of areas that have these lightning holes. So I'm trying to make this a, well, it's kind of a fantasy cockpit, but again, if you get the flavor and you do it with the minimum amount of really hard work, this is a relatively easy way to make this look aircraft. Has that look of lightened aluminum. Made up a floor pattern, and what I want to do is I put some contact cement on the back of it. As soon as it's sticky, I want to attach some 600 paper so that that'll be the floor. It'll look like an anti-grip panel for the floor. Biggest problem with putting a floor in, I don't want any interference with the arrow shaft. Even from this angle, I just want to see that where I can see the reflection of the glass. With the glass on, it's picking angles up just the way I think it should. That'll just work well. I'm going to start with P1, which is my pattern. And the first thing I want to do is I want to go get the book, try to find what I think will be a reasonable instrument layout, and get a look at just what some of the choices are in instrument layouts. Again, we can't make a little feel for where these instruments go, even though I can't do this, just if any of them are real obvious. When you go to line these up, it's always best if the instruments are a little smaller than they should be. See how you get a little ring around it. What happens if the instrument is too big, it kind of blocks it out. I don't know which looks less realistic. You'd really like to have it perfect, but in this case we have one set that's too big. This is why you need all the sets. I have sandpaper on a toothpick. This is just a perfect spot for it right now to do some of the final detailing. Usually you need 2 or 3 coats of thin CA sanded between coats. Simulate this the shape. And after bending all that wire and seeing what a pain that was, boy, this looks like the lesser of 2 evils ultimately. I want to put all of this together for a split second. Just get an idea that if everything is going to fit the way I expect it will. Never fits the way you expect it will. Now it's almost like right now we're arranging little dollhouse furniture type of things. Now see, this color green is just a little bit different. There's that dashboard. And I can get a little look at. And this is what I do constantly, is just do a little mock-up to see if everything kind of fits. Looks a little bit different than when we first started. It's starting to look like like I had envisioned anyway. And our little brake lever, the epoxy dried. Doing this with dyed epoxy is really a nice way to get a nice finish on it. It's almost impossible to get nice finishes on these little parts. This is a good little tip though. That little lever in there, that kind of worked out the way I wanted to. More little detail I want to make of it. One of the tricks is there's not much better material that I know of than 64th plywood when it's laminated. And what I want to do is I want to make a little schematic of the shape that I want, oversize, and then I want to cut out 4 or 5 laminations, cross the grain, and that gives you a nice material to work in little details with. It needs almost no pre-finishing, usually works well right away. You can see the rivets on the inside of the canopy. I really like that. I like that effect. The nice thing about doing this is any canopy work, you can really do as much detailing, or you can, if you choose, you could just paint the canopy on, or in some cases people don't even put a canopy on. Now I can start working my sanding operation in here. And obviously, maybe I'll even put a piece of tin foil over here. or something to protect that. But I need to sand this, get this blend real nice, decide just how I'm going to seal that edge up. I know this will be one place. Well, we'll do a test, see if Brodak primer. This is the kind of spot where getting a nice smooth fill, that white Brodak primer seems to be just one of the things that really works well. And then of course, probably on the next tape, we'll silver this all in and we'll be ready to start. We have to finish the tape with the trim on it yet. Boy, that's, can't wait to see this in full camo. Every time I look at it, I get more excited about seeing it done.